Good morning, everybody. Pastor Howie here with Monday's edition of Lectionary Thoughts. Today is the first day of February, and although many of you probably don't know this, some of you do. I may have spoken of it before. On the Celtic Christian calendar, today is the day that the Celtic Christians remember a woman by the name of Bridget, who was born soon after Patrick passed away, and she's known as the person who, after Patrick brought Christianity to birth in Ireland, Bridget is known as the person who raised Christianity in Ireland. So she's quite famous. Today is Bridget's Day. It's still celebrated. It was also celebrated as a day of transition from the winter quarter to the spring quarter. So for the Celtic peoples, ancient Celtic peoples, around the 1st of February, they recognized the halfway point, which they called Imbolc, I-M-B-O-L-C, and they recognized it as a cross-quarter day. That as far as the position of the sun in the sky, it was the halfway position between the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year in the northern hemisphere, and the spring equinox, which was the first of the equalizing days where darkness gives way to light. So I just thought I'd mention that to you because actually the actual cross-quarter event each year around this time this year happens on Wednesday at 9:40 a.m. in Eastern Standard Time, and so that means we're halfway to that wonderful day of spring equinox, and we see evidence of that. There's more light in the morning, more light in the afternoon, and it's encouraging to us. But as we look at these daily readings, we're looking into the light that is always with us, even during the most dark times. And today, we'll be reading a psalm, Psalm 35, verses 1 through 10. We'll be reading a section from Numbers, chapter 22, verses 1 through 21. And we'll be reading the book of Acts, chapter 21, verses 17 through 26. And again, there's kind of a theme that runs through these passages, and that theme is how we handle the enemies of Christ from outside of us, and even some of them that still stir within our own hearts. So Psalm 35 is a psalm of David, and we know that David had lots of opportunities to get discouraged because of his enemies all around him who sought to oppress him or even kill him. And so this is a prayer of David to the Lord concerning that kind of a situation. Contend, Lord, with those who contend with me. Fight against those who fight against me. Take up shield and armor, arise and come to my aid. Brandish spear and javelin against those who pursue me. Say to me, I am your salvation. May those who seek my life be disgraced and put to shame. May those who plot my ruin be turned back in dismay. May they be like chaff before the wind, with the angel of the Lord driving them away. May their path be dark and slippery, with the angel of the Lord pursuing them. Since they hid their net for me without cause, and without cause dug a pit for me, may ruin overtake them by surprise. May the net they hid entangle them. May they fall into the pit to their ruin. Then my soul will rejoice in the Lord and delight in his salvation. My whole being will exclaim, who is like you, Lord? You rescue the poor from those too strong for them, the poor and needy from those who rob them. And increasingly, it seems like the culture of our world is turning against and becoming adversarial towards Christianity in particular. Religion in general to a certain extent, but Christianity in particular. And even within our own numbers, we are tempted to join with the rest of the world and say that Christianity cannot be the only way. But it is. There's only one way for human beings like you and me to be reconciled to the God who created the heavens and the earth. And that is through faith in the one and only Son of God, who God gave to the world because he so loved the world, so that everyone who believes in him will not perish but have everlasting life. And so we see examples, though, of adversaries surrounding Israel and adversaries surrounding the early church fathers like the Apostle Paul. And we see two examples of this in Numbers chapter 22 and in the book of Acts that we'll be looking at after this. David's enemies were sometimes people of his own people. Others were, before the children of Israel came into the promised land, others were the children of Abraham, descendants of Abraham, many of them, but those who had gone their own way. And they were scared of Israel, and they tried to contrive ways to prevent Israel from the blessing of the promised land. And that's the case in the book of Numbers 22, verses 1 through 21. Then the Israelites traveled to the plains of Moab and camped along the Jordan across from Jericho. The Moabites were ultimately descendants of Abraham through not Isaac but Esau. And so this kind of sets the stage for us. Now Balak, son of Zippor, saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites, and Moab was terrified because there were so many people. Indeed, Moab was filled with dread because of the Israelites. The Moabites then said to the elders of Midian, "This horde is going to lick up everything around us, as an ox licks up the grass of the field." So Balak, son of Zippor, who was king of Moab at that time, sent messengers to summon Balaam, son of Beor, who was at Pethor near the Euphrates River in his native land. Balak said, "A people has come out of Egypt. They cover the face of the land and have settled next to me. Now come and put a curse on these people because they are too powerful for me. Perhaps then I will be able to defeat them and drive them out of the land. For I know that whoever you bless is blessed, and whoever you curse is cursed." We don't know much about Balaam other than the fact that he apparently was a seer of some sort and was renowned for the things that he would do as far as blessing and cursing was concerned. Whether or not he was in league with the devil, there's a question about that. The elders of Moab and Midian left, taking with them the fee for divination. So he was a diviner. He was a seer. When they came to Balaam, they told him what Balak had said. "Spend the night here," Balaam said to them, "and I will report back to you with the answer the Lord gives me." So the Moabite officials stayed with him. God came to Balaam and asked, "Who are these men with you?" Balaam said to God, "Balak, son of Zippor, king of Moab, sent me this message. A people that has come out of Egypt covers the face of the land. Now come and put a curse on them for me. Perhaps then I will be able to fight them and drive them away." But God said to Balaam, "Do not go with them. You must not put a curse on these people because they are blessed." And of course, they were blessed by God. The next morning, Balaam got up and said to Balak's officials, "Go back to your own country, for the Lord has refused to let me go with you." So not only do we see Balaam has some sort of relationship with God, the same God that Israel has relationship with, but we also see that he took to heart what God said to him and testified to that fact before these representatives from Balak, the king of Moab. So the Moabite officials returned to Balak and said, Balaam refused to come with us. They didn't mention anything about the Lord saying that. Then Balak sent other officials, more numerous and more distinguished than the first. So he's trying to impress him a little bit more and entice him a little bit more to listen to him rather than to listen to the Lord. So they came to Balaam and said, this is what Balak, son of Zippor, says. Do not let anything keep you from coming to me, because I will reward you handsomely and do whatever you say. Come and put a curse on these people for me. But Balaam answered them, even if Balak gave me all the silver and gold in his palace, I could not do anything great or small to go beyond the command of the Lord, and catch this, of the Lord my God. So Balaam had some kind of a relationship with God. Now spend the night here so that I can find out what else the Lord will tell me. That night God came to Balaam and said, since these men have come to summon you, go with them, but do only what I tell you. And verse 21 is the beginning of a different section. And the section in the NIV is called Balaam's donkey. Balaam got up in the morning, saddled his donkey, and went with the Moabite officials. And I think we're probably going to see something about that famous event with this donkey speaking to Balaam. But we'll have to wait and see about that. But I want you to know, the people of Israel, just like us today, had enemies who sought to wipe them out. Because, as we saw in the Gospel of John, light has come into the world, but the people loved darkness more than light, because they didn't want their deeds to be revealed. That was not only the case in Israel, it was the case in those who pursued David without cause, that we read about in the Psalm today. And we see it very subtly revealed in Acts 21, where Paul comes back to Jerusalem for the last time. 21:17 through 26. And we also see how easy it is for even a Christian man like the Apostle Paul to fall back upon the directions that God has given to us. When we arrived at Jerusalem, the brothers and sisters received us warmly. The next day, Paul and the rest of us went to see James, and all the elders were present. Paul noticed Peter's gone by now. Peter's brother James, or John's brother James, was already martyred. So this is James, perhaps James the son of Alphaeus, and could also be James the brother of Jesus. This is quite a few years after Jesus died and rose again and ascended back to heaven. This is quite a few years after Pentecost. Paul greeted them and reported in detail what God had done among the Gentiles through his ministry. When they heard this, they praised God. Then they said to Paul, you see, brother, how many thousands of Jews have believed. So the gospel came to the Jews first, even on the day of Pentecost. And that day, we're told in the beginning of the book of Acts chapter 2, that 3,000 people, 3,000 men, not to mention wives and children, 3,000 men joined the church. They repented of their sins, they were baptized, they joined the church. So this is years later. They have been, and they're all of them are zealous for the law. So they're still connected to the old covenant, even as they're living now in the new covenant. And that's the hard thing. That was the hard thing for many of the Jewish people, to let go of the old and enter fully into the new. Caused a lot of trouble for Paul, most of his ministerial life. Paul greeted them, reported in detail what he had done. They heard this, they praised God. They said, see how many thousands of Jews have believed, and all of them are zealous for the law. They have been informed that you teach all the Jews who live among the Gentiles to turn away from Moses, telling them not to circumcise their children or live according to our customs. So they were informed, but really they were misinformed, because we don't see anything in Paul's writings that really do speak those things. But we do see in Paul's writings that his ministry was about Christ. His ministry was a proclamation of the new covenant in Jesus Christ, and his ministry was about faith in Christ, not trust in the works of the law. What shall we do? They will certainly hear that you have come. So do what we tell you. There are 4 men with us who have made a vow, still living in the old covenant. Take these men, join in their purification rites, and pay their expenses so that they can have their heads shaved. So they're asking Paul to join with them in this old covenant ritual. Then everyone will know there is no truth in these reports about you, but that you yourself are living in obedience to the law. Which Paul did live in obedience to the law, but he lived in obedience to the law in the spirit of the new covenant. As for the Gentile believers, we have written to them our decision that they should abstain from food sacrificed to idols, from blood, from the meat of strangled animals, and from sexual immorality. Well, we know about that, and Paul knew about that because he was part of the meeting back in Acts 15, years before these events, where that letter was composed. And that was part of what his ministry was, that the Gentiles who come into Christ are not obligated to become Jews first. He even said circumcision is meaningless if we have no faith. The next day, Paul took the men and purified himself along with them. Then he went to the temple to give notice of the date when the days of purification would end and the offering would be made for each of them. So he complied with the request. But in reality, he got himself into trouble. He got himself arrested, got himself almost half beaten to death with the whip of inquiry that the Romans used when someone was accused of a high crime. And ultimately, he got taken to Rome. This is how God worked all these things out. But what we see in here is that we need to be careful. We need to be careful. We need to be faithful to God as David was. We need to trust God to defend us against the adversaries around us. It's not our position to do something superstitious and call for curses upon our enemies. We're to love even our enemies. And we are not to compromise and go back on the old ways of doing things, but just trust in the Lord. And so I want to leave you with this word from Psalm 35. When David says in verse 3, and he's asking the Lord to contend for him, to contend against his adversaries for him. And he's asking God to give him a personal sense of assurance. He's asking God, say to me, I am your salvation. And no matter what we're facing today, no matter what we're facing in the weeks and months and years to come, in this country, with a new administration in place that may or may not be helpful to the spread of Christianity. We don't know. There's some evidence that there's more wicked things being thought of than ever before. But that's not for us to worry about. That's not for us to take up arms against. That's for us to trust in the Lord and ask the Lord to remind us daily, I am your salvation. Whatever you're going through personally, ask the Lord to remind you, I am your salvation. Let those words kind of echo in your hearts and in your minds, that no matter what happens, God is our salvation. Christ is our salvation. No matter what happens in this world, nothing can stop the movement of Christ, and nothing can separate us from Christ. He is our salvation. So may that be encouraging to you. Don't know if you who are viewing these videos spends a lot of time watching the news and then getting all anxious about things that are going on. But you know what? It doesn't matter what's going on in that sense. It's for us to pray for our leaders, and it is for us to seek the face of God, that he may assure us that his salvation is our salvation. So may you be blessed, not cursed. And we'll see you tomorrow. God bless your day.